He had everything: a seven-figure home in suburban Atlanta, a thriving logistics business that he'd built from nothing, a beautiful wife named Mary who believed in him when nobody else did. But success changed him, and one moment of weakness would cost him everything. This is the true inspired story of a man who threw away the greatest love of his life for a woman who was playing him all along. A story about betrayal, manipulation, and a woman who reclaimed her power. By the end, you'll understand why Mary's decision was not just wise, it was transformative. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Meet Chris Webb. Born in 1975 in Jackson, Mississippi, Chris grew up in a working-class family. His father worked at a cotton mill. His mother cleaned houses. They didn't have much, but they had dreams for their son. Chris was the first in his family to graduate college. He earned a degree in business administration from the University of Tennessee on a full scholarship while working 3 part-time jobs. In 2003, at 28 years old, with $15,000 in savings and a borrowed truck, Chris started Webb Logistics out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. For the first 5 years, Chris barely slept. He drove routes himself. He handled customer service. He managed the books. He was everywhere at once. His friends thought he was crazy. His parents worried he'd fail, but Chris had vision. And more importantly, he had determination. By 2008, when the recession hit and most businesses collapsed, Webb Logistics actually grew. Small businesses needed affordable logistics solutions. Chris provided them. By 2010, Chris employed 50 people. By 2015, he employed 200 people. By 2020, Webb Logistics was valued at $45 million. Chris Webb had built an empire, on his own terms, through relentless work and unwavering focus. Success means nothing without someone to share it with. Enter Mary Mitchell. Mary was 26 when she walked into Webb Logistics as an office manager. She was intelligent, graceful, with a quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. But what made Mary extraordinary wasn't her appearance. It was her character. Mary came from old money. Her family owned shipping companies, banking institutions, and real estate across 3 states. She had trust funds, inherited wealth, and every advantage. But Mary didn't want her father's money. She wanted to build something herself, to prove herself. So she took a job at Chris' company and never mentioned her family's wealth. She showed up early, stayed late, and worked harder than anyone else on the team. And Chris fell in love with her, not immediately. Over 2 years, as he watched Mary organize chaos, mentor employees, and show genuine care for people, Chris realized he'd met his match. One evening, after everyone had left, Chris found Mary reorganizing files. He laughed and asked why she cared so much about details nobody else would notice. Mary smiled. Because the details matter. Because when you care about something, you care about everything that makes it work. And Chris, I care about what you've built here. 3 months later, Chris proposed. He didn't have a big ring yet. Instead, he gave her a simple gold band and a promise. I'm going to give you the world, said yes. They married on June 15, 2008 in an intimate ceremony. Mary's family embraced Chris like their own son. They saw in him what their daughter had seen, a man of integrity, vision, and strength. The first years of their marriage were magical. Mary worked with Chris to expand the business. He handled strategy. She handled culture and people. They were partners by day, business partners. By night, lovers and best friends. Mary was Chris' rock, the person he called first when things went wrong, the person who believed in him when he doubted himself, and Chris cherished her every single day. By 2018, Chris and Mary lived in a stunning $3.2 million home in Buckhead, Atlanta. 4 stories, marble floors, a chef's kitchen, an indoor pool, a home theater. But it was Mary who made it a home. She was decorated with elegance and warmth, family photos, comfortable furniture, a library of thousands of books, a kitchen where neighbors would drop by because Mary was always cooking something beautiful. Mary became prominent in Atlanta's philanthropic circles. She used her family connections to raise money for women's shelters, educational programs. She was thoughtful, purposeful, and generous. Chris was president of his company, still working hard, still coming home tired, still needing Mary to ground him. Mary was happy. Their life was good, they didn't have children yet. Mary wanted to wait to be more established. Chris agreed. There was time, they were still young. From the outside they had everything. From the inside they had something more valuable, genuine partnership, but security is fragile. And happiness can be stolen in a single moment of weakness. That moment was coming. Here's what they don't tell you about success. It's isolating. The higher Chris climbed, the more isolated he became. He was no longer the entrepreneur who drove the trucks. He was the CEO, the face of the company, the decision maker. With success came pressure, relentless pressure, board meetings, investor calls, client dinners, trade conferences, expansion plans, quarterly reports. By 2019, Chris was traveling 200 days a year. Monday mornings he'd leave. Thursday nights he'd return. Mary would wait, she'd have dinner ready. She'd ask about his day, but something was shifting. Chris started seeing Mary differently, not intentionally, but in his mind she'd become predictable. She asked the same questions. She cooked the same meals. She was the same woman she'd always been. Mary was still beautiful, still intelligent, still kind, but Chris had changed. And he was looking at her through the lens of his new life. In his new life, Chris was surrounded by young, ambitious people. His office staff had gotten younger as the company grew. His advisors included brilliant, driven women who were different from Mary. Mary was content, settled, stable. Chris was starting to feel stagnant. And he was starting to blame her for it. This is where the story turns dark. Because what happens next isn't Mary's fault. It isn't about Mary at all. It's about Chris losing sight of what he had while chasing what he thought he wanted. In spring 2019, Webb Logistics contracted with Ascent Solutions, a consulting firm, to streamline supply chain operations. They sent 3 consultants. One was Jasmine Sterling. Jasmine was 29, stunning, tall, elegant, with an air of sophistication and confidence. But beyond her appearance, Jasmine was brilliant. She understood logistics, supply chain management, and operational efficiency. Her presentations were flawless. Her solutions were real, and she was interested in Chris. The first one-on-one meeting was lunch. Jasmine asked about his vision. Chris spoke for 2 hours about his dreams, his ambitions, the empire he wanted to build. Jasmine listened with complete attention. She asked intelligent follow-up questions. She laughed at his jokes. She leaned in when she spoke. "Chris, you're remarkable. I've never met an entrepreneur with your vision and drive. Most men your age would be satisfied, but you're still hungry, still pushing." For a man who'd been hearing the same routine from his wife for years, this was intoxicating. When the consulting project ended, Jasmine didn't leave. She accepted a permanent position as director of operations, reporting directly to Chris. What Chris didn't know was that this wasn't an accident. Jasmine had researched him. She knew about his company, his wealth, his marriage. She had a strategy, and that strategy was calculated. Jasmine had done this before. She'd studied men like Chris, successful, aging slightly, prone to insecurity. Men like Chris were easy to understand. All she had to do was make him feel young, make him feel alive, make him feel like maybe he was still that hungry 28-year-old who'd started with nothing. She was an expert at this game. It started small. Lingering conversations in Chris' office after work, text messages about business that turned personal. Jasmine would ask about his childhood, his dreams, his regrets. "You ever feel like you missed out on anything, Chris? Like you were so focused on building that you forgot to live?" Chris told himself these conversations meant nothing, that Jasmine was just being friendly, that he was reading too much into it, but he was reading exactly what she intended. By July 2019, 4 months after she joined the company, it happened. After a client dinner, Chris and Jasmine were the last 2 in the office. They'd been drinking wine. The conversation had turned personal. Jasmine leaned close. "You know what I think your problem is? I think you're afraid of what? Afraid of feeling alive, afraid of taking risks, afraid of letting yourself be wanted by someone who sees your true potential." Then she kissed him. Chris knew it was wrong. Every instinct screamed that this was betrayal. But at that moment, he didn't care. He felt alive for the first time in years. They didn't go further that night. But that kiss opened a door that couldn't be closed. Over the next few weeks, Chris told himself it was just an attraction, that it would pass. that he loved Mary and would never actually cross the line, but Jasmine was relentless, a hand on his shoulder, her fingers brushing his, clothes that accentuated her figure, laughter that made him feel like the most interesting man alive, and she was always there, always available, always focused entirely on him. Chris was drowning and Jasmine was the oxygen. In August, after a conference in Miami, Chris and Jasmine stayed an extra night. That night in a hotel room overlooking the ocean, Chris finally crossed the line completely. He made love to another woman while his wife waited at home. When Chris got home the next day, Mary embraced him at the door. She'd missed him. She had dinner waiting, his favorite, homemade lasagna, and Chris felt like he was going to vomit. Over the next month, Chris became a ghost in his own marriage, physically present, emotionally absent. He stopped attending Mary's charity events. He made excuses to stay late at the office, Mary noticed. She asked him repeatedly what was wrong. Nothing's wrong. Work is just demanding. I'm overwhelmed. I need space. But Mary knew better. She could feel him pulling away. She could sense the shift. One night she confronted him directly. Chris, something is wrong. You're distant. You won't look at me. You won't touch me. Talk to me, please. Let me help. And Chris looked her in the eye and lied. Mary, you're being paranoid. You're projecting your insecurities onto me. If you're unhappy, maybe you need therapy, but don't accuse me of something that isn't happening. The cruelty of this lie would haunt Chris forever because Mary wasn't paranoid. Mary was intuitive. She'd sensed danger and Chris had the audacity to gaslight her, and the affair continued. Chris didn't understand was that he was never in control of this situation. Not for one moment. Jasmine had a plan. And it was worth millions. Jasmine had researched Chris thoroughly. She knew Webb Logistics was worth nearly $50 million. She knew about his property holdings, investment accounts, and his thriving business. She knew Webb Logistics was being acquired by a larger company, an acquisition that would make Chris' personal stake worth upwards of $30 million. And she knew the law. Under Georgia law, a mistress with documented dependency and a child could potentially claim rights to significant assets. Jasmine's plan wasn't just an affair. It was to become indispensable to Chris, to create leverage, to position herself so that when the time came, she could extract maximum value. First, she became pregnant. She told Chris it was accidental, even though she'd been monitoring her cycle carefully. She was on birth control, or so he thought. In reality, she was making a calculated decision to bind him to her permanently. When she told Chris, he panicked. He was terrified. For the first time in his life, he couldn't control the situation. Jasmine comforted him. I'm not asking you to leave, Mary. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to have this child. And if you want to be involved, I'd love that. If not, I'll raise this baby alone. It was masterful. She was offering him an impossible choice. He could never be uninvolved. She knew that. She was betting on his guilt. 3 months later, Jasmine revealed she was pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl. I just found out. I'm as shocked as you are. But Chris, they're going to need you, both of them. Can you imagine? 2 beautiful children with your eyes, your intelligence. She was painting a picture of legacy, of redemption, of being the father he'd always wanted to be. But there was a problem. Chris was still married, so Jasmine engineered the second part of her plan. She made sure Mary found out. Discovered the affair by accident. One evening, Chris' phone was charging on the nightstand. A text came through from an unknown number. Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Mary's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. She didn't want to violate his privacy, but she had to know. She unlocked it and opened his messages. What she found was 6 months of explicit conversations, photos, videos, declarations of love. But worse than the sexual content were Jasmine's words about her. Your wife is boring, Chris. She doesn't excite you like I do. You're wasting your potential on a mediocre woman. And Chris had responded, you're right, being with you makes me feel alive. Stood in the darkness, reading these messages, and felt her entire world collapse. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the phone. She simply sat on the edge of the bed and wept. When Chris came home, Mary was sitting in the living room in the dark. Who is Jasmine Sterling? She asked quietly. Chris' face went white. He knew immediately that it was over. He tried to lie at first, said it meant nothing, that it would never happen again, that he loved Mary, but Mary held up the phone. Don't lie to me, not anymore. Don't insult me by lying. And Chris finally broke down. He confessed everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the twins, that he was in love with another woman. I'm sorry, Mary, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I did this, but Jasmine is carrying my children. I have a responsibility to them. Listen to her husband, the man she'd given everything to, choose another woman over her, and in that moment something shifted inside her. The love didn't disappear, but it hardened, it calcified into something else, something stronger, something that would eventually allow her to walk away. Get out. She said quietly, Mary, get out of this house. Go to your mistress, go have your bobbies. But you need to leave right now. Chris left that night. 2 days later, he moved Jasmine into an apartment. Mary called a divorce lawyer the next morning. Following months were the darkest of Mary's life. She'd been blindsided by infidelity, but never like this. Never by someone she trusted completely. And never with this level of betrayal. Mary moved through the days like a ghost. She'd wake, shower, go through the motions. She'd sit at her desk and break down in the bathroom at least once a day. Her friends asked if she was okay. She said yes. Her family, her father the venture capitalist, her mother the philanthropist, wanted to sue Chris for everything. They wanted aggressive lawyers, they wanted justice, but Mary was broken in a way that lawyers couldn't fix. The hardest part wasn't even the infidelity. People make mistakes. People fall prey to temptation. The hardest part was that Chris had lied to her face. He'd gaslit her. He'd told her she was paranoid when she'd intuited the truth. He'd made her doubt her own instincts. That violation felt deeper than the affair itself. For weeks, Mary questioned everything. Had she been a bad wife? Had she not been attentive enough? Had she let herself go? Had she been too focused on her work? A therapist told her something that changed everything. This isn't about you. This is about Chris' choices. The fact that he gaslit you when confronted is about his character, not your worth. Slowly, Mary began to heal. She stopped blaming herself. She started understanding that she'd done nothing wrong. She'd been a good wife. She'd loved Chris completely. She'd been loyal, supportive, kind. The failure of the marriage wasn't her failure, it was his. And more importantly, she began to see something that her grief had obscured. Her husband's affair was actually a gift, because it freed her. For 14 years, Mary had structured her entire life around being Chris Webb's wife. She'd made choices based on his timeline, his career, his needs. She'd been content to let his ambitions drive her forward. But now, faced with the rubble of that life, Mary had to ask herself a terrifying question. Who was she? And the answer, when it came, terrified her. Because the answer was, she didn't know. Chris was in free fall. He'd left a 14-year marriage for a woman he barely knew. He was living in a luxury apartment, paying for her expenses, waiting for the birth of twins he believed were his biological children. But something was deeply wrong. Jasmine had stopped the seduction. Now that she had him, she didn't need to be sweet. She became demanding, controlling, vindictive. She wanted a bigger apartment. So he got one. She wanted a Mercedes-Benz. So he bought it. She wanted him to leave his company and start a business with her. So he did, which terrified his board of directors. The board, concerned about his stability, voted to give Chris a leave of absence. 3 months to get his head straight. This was devastating. His company was his identity. His success was his value. And now, for the first time, he was stepping away. And Jasmine was thriving under his vulnerability. She'd positioned herself as the only stable thing in his life. The one who loved him unconditionally. Everyone else had abandoned him. Mary with her divorce, his board with their leave, his friends with their judgment. It was a masterclass in manipulation. And Chris was too blinded to see it. When the twins were born in September 2020, a beautiful boy named Jaden and a girl named Ione, Chris wept. He held his children and felt, for the first time since the affair began, that maybe this chaos had meaning. Maybe he was meant to be their father. He had a DNA test done, just as a formality. Just to know their medical history. He wanted to be prepared for any genetic conditions. When he got the results back, he barely read them. He saw his name listed as the biological father and moved on. He was too caught up in the joy of being a new father. While Chris bonded with his children, Jasmine was quietly draining his bank accounts. She insisted they needed a bigger home, a mansion, something that reflected their status. Chris found a stunning $4.2 million home in Brookhaven, Atlanta. He bought it in Jasmine's name. He wanted to show her his commitment. She got a new Range Rover. She hired a nanny, a housekeeper, a personal chef. She took the twins on monthly international trips to Cancun, to Costa Rica, to Dubai. Chris' finances were bleeding. His separation agreement with Mary was generous, too generous. His lawyer had advised caution, but Chris felt guilty. He wanted Mary taken care of. So he agreed to substantial support. He was paying Jasmine's mortgage, the household staff, the travel, her shopping, her salon appointments. Chris went from $15 million in liquid assets to under $3 million in less than a year. He took out massive loans against his stake in Webb Logistics, a stake that was losing value because he wasn't running the company. He borrowed against his retirement accounts. He cashed out investments. He was hemorrhaging money, and he couldn't stop it. And Jasmine just kept demanding more. Chris, if you really loved us, you'd invest in this business idea. A luxury childcare center. We could make millions. He invested $800,000 of borrowed money. The business went nowhere. The twins need better education. Private school costs $40,000 a year per child. He paid for it. I'm not happy, Chris. This house is too small. These cars are last year's models. You used to make me feel like a princess. He sold a piece of property his family had owned for decades. He gave the proceeds to Jasmine. And through all of this, Chris told himself he was doing the right thing, that he was providing for his family, that this was the price of his mistake, but he was wrong. The price wasn't justified, it was a con. By spring 2021, Chris was unrecognizable. He'd gone from confident CEO to anxious, uncertain. He had wrinkles under his eyes from stress. He'd lost weight. His hair had gone completely gray. He was 45 but looked 60. The board of Webb Logistics gave him an ultimatum: return to work or resign. Chris couldn't return. He was too unstable. So he resigned from the company he'd spent 17 years building. The company was sold for $48 million. Chris' share was $18 million, less than he'd hoped, because the buyer had calculated downward due to his departure. When that check came in, Jasmine's eyes lit up. Now we can really live, Chris. A yacht, a home in Miami. We can travel whenever we want. But Chris was beginning to see the pattern, and he was beginning to suspect the truth. Late one night while Jasmine slept, Chris really looked at the twins. I really studied them. Jaden had a birthmark on his left shoulder. Ione had a gap between her front teeth. Chris had neither of these traits. Neither did Jasmine. At 2 a.m., sitting in the dark living room of the $4.2 million home registered in Jasmine's name, Chris made a decision. He needed to know the truth. And he needed to know it without Jasmine finding out. He contacted a private DNA testing facility. He took hair samples from both children while they slept. He provided his own saliva sample, and he waited. The results would come back within 2 weeks, and those results would change everything. The DNA results came back on a Thursday morning. Chris received the email while he was at a coffee shop, away from home, away from Jasmine. His hands trembled as he opened the attachment. Paternity test RESULTSSUBGCT. Jaden Sterling status. Not biologically related probability of paternity. 0% subject. Ione Sterling status. Not biologically related probability of paternity. 0%. The words blurred as Chris read them again and again. They weren't his. Neither one. Chris sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He was in shock. His entire life flashed before his eyes. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every decision was made on a lie. He'd given up his wife. He'd abandoned his business. He'd spent millions of dollars. He'd destroyed his reputation. He'd isolated himself from everyone who loved him. And it was all for nothing. When Chris finally went home that evening, he was a different person. He walked in and found Jasmine on the couch, watching television, eating grapes. "Where have you been all day?" she asked, barely looking up. "We need to talk." Chris said quietly. Something in his tone made her sit up straight. "What's wrong?" Chris held up the DNA results. His hand was steady. His voice was ice. "Me the truth, right now. Tell me everything." Jasmine's face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she was going to lie. Then she saw the look in Chris' eyes, and she did something that shocked him more than the DNA results. She laughed, not a small laugh, a full, cruel laugh. "My God, Chris, You actually thought you were their father. The laugh was like a knife. Who are they? Chris asked. They're my ex-boyfriend's children. His name is Deshaun. He's in prison. He couldn't take care of them, so I had to find someone who could. And you were perfect. Rich, stupid, desperate to feel young. Jasmine sat back on the couch, clearly enjoying the moment. You were so easy, Chris. I've done this before. Find a wealthy man in crisis. Make him feel young, get pregnant. They never ask questions. Once they're trapped, you take everything. I have assets in my name. I have property ownership. I'm set for life. Long have you been planning this? Chris asked, his voice hollow. From the moment I saw your company profile online. I researched you, Chris. I knew how much money you had. I knew your marriage was stale. I knew you were vulnerable, so I engineered a job, seduced you, got pregnant, and now I'm comfortable. What about the children? What about them? They're my children. I love them, but they're also leveraged. As long as I have them, you care about them. Or at least you thought you did. Chris sat down. His entire body was shaking. Want you out of this house. This house is in my name, Chris. I'm not going anywhere. But if you want to leave, that door is open. Chris realized the full scope of what had happened. Jasmine owned the house. She had legal custody of the children. She had leverage, and she had a lawyer. A ruthless lawyer ready to file paperwork claiming financial dependency and demanding ongoing support. Chris spent that night in a hotel. The next morning, he got a call from Jasmine's lawyer. Unless Chris was willing to be generous, very generous, with a financial settlement, Jasmine would file suit in family court, claiming emotional distress, financial dependency, demanding spousal support and child support. She also had documentation of every gift, every property purchase, every bank transfer, a sophisticated paper trail she'd created specifically to build a legal case. Chris' lawyer told him he was in a precarious position. The family court judge could potentially rule in Jasmine's favor because of the documented dependency and Chris' history of providing. There was only one way to end this: pay her off. So Chris did. He negotiated a settlement. He gave Jasmine $3 million in a lump sum. He gave her the house, free and clear. He agreed to pay $8,000 per month in support for 5 years. In total, he gave up approximately $7.5 million in assets and future payments. And the final insult: Jasmine smiled when she signed the settlement. You were a good mark, Chris. Really. You provided a comfortable life. Maybe the next guy will have more money. That night, Chris sat in a hotel room with nothing but the clothes on his back and the devastating knowledge that he'd lost everything. 6 months after Jasmine's confession, Chris' divorce from her was finalized. Mary had continued with her own divorce proceedings. She'd hired an excellent lawyer. She'd made it clear she wanted a fair settlement, not a punitive one, but something unexpected happened during the separation. Mary discovered she was pregnant. Chris' child. The baby they'd talked about having someday before the affair destroyed everything. When Mary found out, she didn't reach out to Chris. She didn't ask him to come back. She simply accepted it. This was her child. Their child. And she would raise this baby with or without him. One day, months later, Chris reached out. He asked if they could meet, just once. Just to talk. Mary agreed. They met at a coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta. Mary had changed. She looked stronger, more settled, more radiant than he'd ever seen her. But Chris immediately noticed something that made his heart stop. Mary was pregnant. She wore a flowing cream-colored dress and her belly was unmistakably swollen. She was carrying his child. And from the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence, the serene hand resting on her belly, it was clear she'd made complete peace with this. Chris felt the world shift beneath his feet. Is this? Yes, Chris, I'm pregnant. I'm carrying your child. I'm about 6 months along now. She said it calmly, with a grace that took his breath away. Our baby, Chris whispered. Our baby, Mary confirmed. But I need you to understand something very clearly. This changes nothing between us. Nothing. Please, I know I made a terrible mistake. I know I threw away everything we had, but this is a second chance. This is stop. Mary raised her hand. Chris, listen to me. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I have already made my decision. I filed for divorce 3 months ago. The paperwork is already being processed. You can't, I can, and I have. Chris, I was going to tell you about the baby eventually, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not from a lawyer. I wanted you to know that this child exists, but that's all you need to know. Chris' face was desperate. Mary, please, I love you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one. For our baby, for our family. Stood up. She was graceful, composed, like royalty rising from a throne. You had your chance, Chris. You had 14 years. You threw it away. And I forgive you for that, but I will not let you throw away my future. And I will not let you be a part of my child's life in a way that teaches this baby that it's okay to be treated the way you treated me. Moving back to Connecticut, to my family's estate. I'm going to raise this child in that home, in beauty, in security, in a place where they will learn their worth. They will grow up knowing that they are loved completely, unconditionally by their mother. And they will know their father, you, but as someone who made mistakes. As someone who wasn't strong enough to protect what mattered most. Don't do this. Chris reached out, but Mary stepped back, protecting herself and the life growing inside her. This is already done, Chris. It's been done for a very long time. I'm just finally telling you. My lawyers will be in contact with you regarding child support and custody arrangements. My family's legal team will make sure everything is handled fairly and professionally. Adjusted her dress, placed both hands on her belly, and looked at Chris with eyes full of clarity and strength. Wish you well, Chris. I truly do. I hope you find yourself. I hope you understand what you lost. And I hope you spend the rest of your life being grateful for this child, because this is the only legacy you're leaving behind. Not your company, not your wealth, just this baby. And I will make sure this baby knows they are loved, that they are worthy. That they don't need a man who couldn't see their mother's value. Mary, I'm begging you. Let me be a father to this child. Please, you will be a father, Chris. You'll pay child support. You'll have scheduled visits. You'll be a father in the way that the courts decide you deserve to be. But you will not be the father I hoped you would be, because that man doesn't exist. That man is gone. And with that, Mary walked out of the coffee shop, her hand protecting her belly, her head held high. Chris watched her go, watched the woman he'd loved and destroyed, now carrying his unborn child, walk away with the dignity and strength of someone who finally understood her own worth. He sat alone at that table for hours, understanding finally, completely, irrevocably, what he'd thrown away. Not just a marriage, but the privilege of being a partner to an extraordinary woman. And now, the privilege of raising a child with someone who would teach that child what real love looks like. The next 2 years were brutal for Chris. He filed for bankruptcy. He lost the assets he'd managed to hold onto. He had to downsize to a modest one-bedroom apartment. He took a job as a regional director at a logistics company, far below his former status, but it paid the bills. He attended therapy 3 times a week. He joined a support group for men dealing with fraud and manipulation. He read everything he could about the psychology of infidelity and deception. Slowly, painfully, Chris began to understand something crucial. His failure wasn't in what Jasmine did to him. His failure was in the choices that made him vulnerable to her manipulation. He'd been arrogant. He believed he was too smart, too successful, too self-aware to be fooled. That arrogance had blinded him. He'd been insecure beneath his confident exterior. Success hadn't filled the void inside him. It had just given him a bigger stage to hide on. He'd been ungrateful. He had Mary, a woman who loved him genuinely, completely, unconditionally, and he'd treated her with disdain because she wasn't exciting enough. These realizations were painful, but they were liberating. Chris started volunteering at a men's shelter. He mentored young entrepreneurs starting their own businesses. He was honest about his failures. He talked openly about his mistakes. By 2024, Chris had stabilized his life. He wasn't wealthy anymore, but he was stable. He had a modest but comfortable home. He had meaningful relationships, but there was still a hole in his heart where Mary used to be, a hole that would never fully heal, because he knew, finally and forever, what he'd lost. While Chris was slowly piecing together the remnants of his life, Mary was building something extraordinary. Mary returned to Connecticut to her family's estate, a sprawling 200-acre property with gardens designed by world-renowned landscape architects, a lake, stables, and a mansion that had been in her family for 3 generations. She gave birth to a beautiful son named Alexander. He had his father's eyes, but his mother's strength. From the moment he was born, Mary made one thing clear. This child would know his worth. This child would grow up in beauty, in luxury, in security. But more importantly, this child would grow up knowing that love means respect, that partnership means equality, that a strong woman is someone to cherish, not to abandon. Mary raised Alexander in the estate, surrounded by gardens, lakes, and the constant presence of his mother's unwavering strength. She taught him about honor, about loyalty, about what it means to truly love someone. She established a foundation in her family's name, dedicated to helping women who'd been victims of infidelity and emotional abuse. The foundation provided counseling, financial literacy training, and career coaching. She wrote a book called The Stronger Path, Reclaiming Your Life After Betrayal. The book became an international bestseller. Mary was featured in major publications. She gave speeches at universities and women's conferences around the world. But more importantly, Mary became a sanctuary for broken women. Her foundation helped thousands of women understand their worth beyond the men who'd abandoned them. She showed them, through her own example, that walking away wasn't giving up, it was reclaiming power. Alexander grew up watching his mother lead, watching her make decisions with clarity, watching her turn her pain into purpose. Mary's family business, the shipping companies, the real estate holdings, the banking interests, became a female-led empire under her guidance. She brought in other brilliant women to help run it. Within 5 years, the business had grown by 40%. Mary hosted charity galas that attracted world leaders, philanthropists, and influential figures. But she remained humble. She remained grounded. She remained focused on her purpose, helping women find themselves after being lost. She paid Chris the child support he was legally owed. She allowed him scheduled visits with Alexander. She was professional, cordial, but never warm. She'd learned to separate the man from the father, but she made sure that Alexander understood something crucial. Your father is a good man who made terrible choices. You can love him and still understand that his choices were wrong. You can learn from his mistakes without repeating them. Chris would visit occasionally. He'd take Alexander to the park. He'd help with homework. He'd be present in the way a father should be. But he would never be the man in Mary's life. That door was permanently closed. 5 years after giving birth to Alexander, Mary had built a life that was infinitely better than the one she'd lost. Not just materially, though her life was certainly luxurious, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. She'd learned what so many people never learn, that sometimes the greatest gift life can give us is the opportunity to start over. And the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to accept that opportunity. Mary had learned to love herself. And from that self-love, everything else flowed. A beautiful child who knew his worth, a thriving business, a purpose that transcended her own life. A legacy of strength that would ripple through generations. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, she was soaring, and most importantly, she was at peace. Every time Alexander asked about his father, Mary would tell him the truth with grace. Your father loves you very much. He just wasn't strong enough to protect our family when it mattered. And that's on him, not on you. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of loyalty. And you will never accept less than that from anyone. And Alexander, growing up in that estate, surrounded by his mother's strength and his grandmother's wisdom, learned what real love looked like. He learned that a strong woman isn't someone to fear or diminish. She's someone to honor. And he learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. Mary returned to Chris' world occasionally, at industry events, at fundraisers. But it was as a successful woman in her own right, not as the wife of a powerful man. Chris would see her sometimes from across a ballroom. She'd be laughing with friends, radiant, confident, completely at peace. And beside her would be their son, Alexander, standing tall, proud, secure in the knowledge that he came from strength. Chris would feel the weight of what he'd lost. Not just Mary, but the privilege of being the man beside her. The privilege of raising a son who respected both his parents. The privilege of building something beautiful with someone extraordinary. But it was too late. Mary had moved on, and she had built something he could never have, a life of genuine purpose, genuine peace, and genuine love. This is the story of Chris Webb and Mary Webb, but it's really a story about choices, about who we want to be. Chris was faced with a choice to appreciate what he had or to chase something new. He chose to chase, And it cost him everything. Mary was faced with a choice to stay or to walk away. She chose to walk away. And in walking away, she found herself. She found her power. She found a life infinitely better. Jasmine was faced with a choice to treat people with kindness or to exploit them. She chose to exploit. And while she got money, she'll never know what it feels like to build something genuine. The truth is, we're all going to face betrayal at some point. We're all going to feel wronged, manipulated, underestimated. And the question isn't, how do we avoid that pain? The question is, what will we do with that pain? Will we let it destroy us? Or will we do what Mary did? Allow it to teach us. Allow it to show us what we're truly capable of. Allow it to be the catalyst for the most beautiful transformation of our lives. That's Mary's legacy. Not that she was betrayed, but she had the courage to walk away and build something extraordinary. And that's the lesson for all of us. You have the power to write the next chapter of your story, and you have the power to make it extraordinary. All it takes is one decision, one moment of courage, one choice to honor yourself. Thank you for watching Mindscape Daily Stories. We'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned for more.